Cheers. Hello. Sorry, I'm not wearing a Hawaiian suit. I said I would. Hi, my name is Johnny Chiodini. I work for Eurogamer.net, which is a lovely site full of very nice people, and I spend a large amount of my existence feeling like utter shit and looking like a twat. But anyway, so yes, I am a video games journalist and also a mental health sufferer, and I'm incredibly lucky to be able to use the former to talk about the latter. I make a show for Eurogamer called Low Batteries, which seeks to examine how video games and mental health relate to one another, and hopefully, I hope it's been useful for some people along the way, but I would be lying if I said I didn't start it as basically a project for me. It was incredibly cathartic for me at a time when I felt like utter crap, basically, and it also taught me a lot about how I use video games to help myself feel better, effectively. So, let's do the mandatory medical bit for context. I suffer from depression and anxiety. I have done since I was about 14 years old, but I wasn't diagnosed until 2012. I then took antidepressants for 2 years, and I underwent a course of cognitive behavioral therapy, which eventually left me feeling stable enough to come off the medication. And I probably did too much drinking along the way. But anyway, I mention this because for as long as I've been aware of my problems with mental health, I have been very conscious of how I use video games as a self-help tool. They've been useful distractions, they've been unhelpful obstructions, and they've even been useful diagnostic tools along the way. So I guess what I want to explore in this talk is how I use video games to help me feel better and how other people can use them as helpful support tools with reference to my own experiences and making low batteries a little bit along the way. Now, I did do a version of this talk at the start of this year at a TEDx event in Oldham, so sorry if at any point it feels like I'm repeating myself, but that said, at that talk, pretty much nobody in the audience played video games, so I literally explained what Tetris is. You guys get the good shit. These are the examples they sell round the side of the counter, so I'm able to go into a little bit more detail. So, that said, what do video games and mental health have to... Whoops, that's a slide ahead. That's meant to pop up when I click again. Oh well, never mind. So what do video games have to do with mental health? Well, for one thing, in order to be kind of potentially helpful, even life-saving tools for people, they can provide, wait for it, welcome distraction. Very good, great. So video games can take a weight off your mind effectively in the same way that people say going for a walk or reading a book can give you a bit of a boost. Basically, this is how I use video games most of the time. You play a video game and it allows you to put a little bit of distance between you and the immediacy of your problems and the things that are bothering you. In other words, it's helping you just basically get things into perspective and give your brain something else to focus on while you take a break from the things that are making you feel dreadful. And on top of that, it helps that games are really fun. Like, they're really fun. Look at Overwatch. Overwatch is a really lovely, colourful video game, which is just, it's nice, but it's also so heavily geared towards making you feel good about things you've done. Overwatch makes you feel like a good team player, and it makes you feel very positive and just generally good about yourself. So whether you're in a game of Overwatch or you're looking at the stats afterwards, Overwatch is a game that's full of all these little notifications and noises that are meant to reward you and say, this is something you've done and it's good and it's positive and it's productive. And when you get a thing like this, when you get, say, play of the game or people vote for the action you've done and your card pings and it makes a noise, you feel rewarded and you feel happy and your brain basically squirts out some endorphins and it helps lift your mood. And I know this is true because the first time I got play of the game, I punched my headphones off my head and both cats ran from the room, which made me feel very, very silly. So I've lost my place, sorry. Oh, that's why. There we go. There's my place. Sorry about this. So, yeah, basically, most significant of all, though, is probably the fact that Overwatch hides the bad stats from you while pushing the good stats and the things you can feel positive about right into your face. So after a game, Overwatch won't tell you how many times you died. However, if you've made a load of kills or you've done a whole bunch of healing, it will push those stats at other people. In other words, Overwatch itself doesn't criticize you, it only celebrates you, and it only makes you feel good about yourself. It even celebrates people who main Widowmaker and don't even know what the point is, let alone how to fight on it. And that's nice. And moreover, it's a thing that people may not necessarily get to experience very often. They may not necessarily be told that something they've done is very good, especially if they're suffering from, something like depression or anxiety or just simple low self-esteem. So to be told that they are effective is pretty great. And to have that plumbed into their home so they can sit down at their PC or their console and just boot it up and get a confidence boost is actually kind of special. And of course, Overwatch is a very colourful game and it's a lot of fun to look at, but games are fun even when they're horrible. Horror games, they make people feel good despite the fact they subject them to some really, really nasty stuff. And people like video games like Dark Souls and Bloodborne. And I think the reason they like these games, despite the fact their USP is this game's really hard, you might not be able to finish it, and it's going to punish you if you're not paying attention. I think these games make people feel good because they make them feel like if they get to the end, they've got through something, that's pretty impressive. They've done something that a lot of people might not have been able to do. In other words, these games make people feel like survivors. So a game like Dark Souls, if you get to the end of it, you can share that experience with another person. You can have that conversation that says, we made it to the end of something other people might have been defeated by. They can say in these communities, and they are very vocal communities for these games, I made it through Dark Souls, and I'm still here, and I'm proud of that fact. And so basically what these people are doing, almost certainly without really realizing it, they're creating support groups for each other. Because if we go back to this statement and we take out Dark Souls, I made it through X, you could put any number of disorders or experiences in there, and it would be a really positive thing for somebody to be able to say about themselves. So, it might seem... Oh, no, hang on, sorry. Oh yeah, that's it. And all of this, of course, comes from, it's before we even touch on games with a very direct application, games that are designed to talk about mental health and have it as their subject matter or have therapeutic applications. There are games like Rake. Rake is a really, really good twine game. It's astonishing, actually. It's a portrayal of what it's like to live with anxiety and to be trying to avoid a panic attack that you feel is coming on. And it's an astonishingly clear representation of what that feels like. When I first played it, I actually had a panic attack because it's so good. It's really my go-to for getting people who don't have anxiety to understand what it feels like. And then you've got, stick with me on this one, you've got Tiny Tina's Assault on Dragon Keep, the DLC for Borderlands 2. And that may not seem very analogous to mental health, but the whole thing, basically, Tiny Tina is running this haphazard game of bunkers and badasses, which is effectively Dungeons and Dragons. And the whole time, she is reliving this trauma that she's unable to get past by projecting it at people and changing the ending and basically performing her grief at people, even though she's running away from the actual problem. And there's this amazing moment near the end where they confront her about it. And she says, I know that I'm grieving, and I know that I'm not doing this in a very good way, but I need this. And it's really profound. If you haven't done it, I mean, I just spoiled the ending for you, but if you want to go back and play it, then, that'll be good. And then there's Flowy, which is a game I have talked about like an awful lot. It's a mobile game aimed at people who suffer from anxiety and are prone to panic attacks. And the idea is, you've got this little ship here in Flowy that you steer along the waterway as it goes. And behind you there is this cloud. And this cloud, as you go, breathes in for 3 seconds, and then it breathes out on your sail for 3 seconds. And the idea behind Flowy is when you feel a panic attack coming on, or you feel yourself, kind of getting keyed up, and you start feeling worse and worse, you pull out this game, and you start playing. And steering the ship distracts you just enough to make sure that you're not just focusing on how bad you're feeling, and it gets your breathing under control as you breathe in for 3 seconds and out for 3 seconds, and hopefully you can marshal yourself enough to avoid a full-blown panic attack. I've used this a lot myself, especially on the tube, because it's low-key enough that you can just do it and you look like you're playing Candy Crush or anything, really. And it's really helpful. I actually heard from a low batteries viewer who said that they had used it when on a particularly bad night out, and it calmed them down enough to be able to call the Samaritans, and then the Samaritans enabled them to get home safely, which is an amazing thing when you think about this is a free game that you can just download to your phone, and it can have such an important impact on people who are just trying to make it through and get through things. So, sorry, I'm going to grab my piece of paper again. So, of course, these things are great, but there is naturally a flip side of the coin. And again, this isn't something I talked about in Oldham because I wanted to be really positive about games there. But games do have a flip side of the coin. For one thing, video game communities can be pretty toxic. As fun as Overwatch is to play and as affirming as it can be, their community can be pretty horrible. And you don't need me to tell you there are certain aspects of the video game community who can make life pretty difficult for others, which is counterproductive and can cause incredible emotional damage. And also, games can be isolating, really. As much as I talked about how I use video games when I'm feeling down and I need to get a break from that, I really fucked it last year with The Witcher 3. Because The Witcher 3 came out, and I played it obsessively. I was talking in the office about it with somebody, and I said, oh, I finished it. And they said, how? It's not been out long. How on earth have you played this massive game to completion? And I opened my mouth to reply, and I thought, oh, I'm depressed as shit. That's how I finished The Witcher 3. Got it, right, fine. And basically, it made me realize that I was feeling awful, and I hadn't clocked it until somebody held up a mirror to my own behavior, and I thought, oh, I am spending an inordinate amount of time in this game, not to help me, but to help me get away from what I should be thinking about and dealing with. The balance had tipped, in other words, from video games being a useful self-help tool to being something that was just about straight-up avoidance. And that was, not great. And, of course, moving on to horror games, as good as horror games are about helping people feel like survivors, they can, of course, be very, very guilty of giving a poor portrayal of mental health. I still think video games has a long way to go in terms of giving a truly useful portrayal of mental health, because games like This Is Outlast, they often portray mental health and mental health sufferers as the enemy, as if mental health itself is this spooky other of which you should be afraid, because mental health sufferers are universally and fundamentally dangerous people, and they ought to be kind of avoided and maligned. And that just simply doesn't help. But, I think there are still very good examples out there for games that do get it right. Life is Strange, for example, has given a very great, depiction of depression and anxiety, but while these are fantastic, the scope of video games that deal with mental health as subject matter is still pretty narrow. You think about things like bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, these things are very rarely depicted, and when they are, it's not always with the greatest of sensitivity. So there's progress to be made there. So, in conclusion, what's my takeaway from this? I kind of feel like I'm about to say three things of which you all know already, but we're going to do it anyway. Number one, video games are great. Number two, there's progress to be made with video games. And number three, people who suffer from mental health issues, which, lest we forget, is 1 in 4 people in the UK alone every year, according to mental health charity Mind, they need support and care and love and understanding. And most importantly, if they want to play as Bastion every once in a while, they should fucking well be allowed to. Thank you very much. Merry Christmas.